I actually quite like him a lot. Went to lunch with Rudy. He's a good lad, mate.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me as always on Twitter at redrock_bball. We're here back to preview another slate of DFS games. Today we're going to be looking at Thursday's 3-game slate in the NBA. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. We will start with the first game of the night. It is the Philadelphia 76ers traveling to Miami for Game 3 to take on the Miami Heat after splitting the first two games. Obviously, that Game 2, we talked about it. Have we talked about it? No, I don't think I have talked about it. We'll talk about it a bit now. It required a pretty massive game from Dwyane Wade for the Heat to get up. The Sixers were also ice cold from 3. Now, to be fair, the Sixers were red hot from 3 in Game 1, but they shot just 19% in Game 2, while Wade went 69% from the field.
Giggity!
For 28, 7, and 3 in 26 minutes. And while that's great, and we know that Wade is an all-time great player, he is just not going to be this hot every single game. It just won't happen. He was atrocious for pretty much all of this season on his two-point shooting, but in this one, barely was able to miss any shots. So look, that sort of stuff's just unlikely to happen. But the other rotational things that happened were Hassan Whiteside, again, minimal minutes, only 15 minutes, and Tyler Johnson, only 14 minutes. And that was a similar pattern to Game 1. So as long as Joel Embiid remains out, I don't think we're going to be getting many minutes from Hassan. We're going to be getting more Jim Johnson, more Justice Winslow so he can guard Ben Simmons. We're going to be getting more Kelly Olynyk, who played 33 minutes in this game. So it's hard to see a position for Whiteside to get minutes. Now, Bam Adebayo was a little bit limited in this one, but he's not going to be too much of a factor. We also saw the iron shoulder Goran Dragic limited somewhat too because Wade was playing that well, so that is something to bear in mind. With the Sixers, Embiid is listed as doubtful. There is still a chance that he could play, and if he does play, that would bump up the value of Hassan Whiteside. Last game, the Sixers started Ersan Ilyasova at center, but went back to Amir Johnson at halftime. I imagine they go back to Ersan to begin Game 3, and that gives him value there. Obviously, Šarić and Simmons continued their hot form, as was Marco Bellinelli in terms of scoring, but his accuracy or his three-point volume dipped, as did JJ Redick. A big part of why the Sixers lost this game, because as I've highlighted many times on this show, the reason that the Sixers had been playing so well in the absence of Joel Embiid was the fact that Redick and Bellinelli had stepped it up to the degree that they had. So that is something for us to pay attention to as we move forward in this game. Markelle Fultz also limited in Game 2. Brett Brown said that the Heat were quite physical, and that's what limited him, giving TJ McConnell some extra minutes. But again, these are guys unlikely to have too much of a DFS impact. If we look at this game on FanDuel, the Sixers are actually favored by 1 in Miami on the road with a total of 217, the highest total of the day. If we look at the point guard matchup, the iron shoulder Goran Dragic is at 6,300. Has not been that good in the first two games. Again, limiting him, giving some of those minutes to Wade. Not sure I really want to go with Dragic here. At home, makes it marginally more interesting, but realistically, I think there are better options on the board than going with Dragic. Tyler Johnson, I have no interest in. Same with Fultz or TJ McConnell. For the shooting guard, Dwyane Wade, everyone's going to be really interested in looking at Dwayne here. He did have almost 44 points in Game 2. He's a $4,900 player. But as I highlighted earlier, it came on 69% shooting. He was really engaged defensively as well, and the shooting was clearly red hot. But at that price, you can afford to use Dwyane Wade. If he had been bumped to, say, a 6,000, I'd be like, nah, I'm not interested in that at all. But at that price, he can do it. I'm still not 100% convinced he's locked in as a cash guy, but I feel a lot better about it given the pricing there. JJ Redick's at 5,600, a little bit of a down Game 2 for JJ, but I do think he can bounce back and be a relatively solid cash option. here. And then you got the Duke and Marco Bellinelli. Bellinelli's at 5,700. It just feels a little bit too high for Bally, especially for cash, whereas Wayne Ellington at 3,600. You can always consider that for tournaments because we know he can go off and drain 7 or 8 threes, and maybe he gets the nod over Wade if he's the one that's hot in this game. But of course, for cash, no interest. At small forward, Joshy Richardson's at 5,800. Bounce back in game 2, dropped 34 points, which is a clear exceeding of that $5,800 value point. The minutes were there. We know what he does defensively. He had a ton of blocks in that game too. I've got no problem with deploying Josh Richardson. While Bob Cove's at 7,100. I would much rather spend or save that $1,300 by taking Richardson than Covington, but Covington, of course, has a really high 55-point upside. I just am not totally sold on Bob Cove, and definitely not for cash. Justice Winslow is an interesting one. He played pretty good defense on Simmons, but only resulted in 7.6 FanDuel points. But if they're going to bump his minutes a bit, at 4,800, he could be a guy to consider, but of course, no way that you'd want anything to do with that in any cash type of situations. You look at him for a tournament guy. The power forward, there's a lot to like here. I like Šarić a lot at 6,400. He was dominant. While Kelly Olynyk at 6,300 is just consistently getting you 30 plus points. And again, if Embiid remains out, I think that's a strong play. Now, if Joel does actually play game 3, I'd be really looking at fading Olynyk pretty solidly because I think they bump Whiteside's minutes up. And Whiteside played about 27, 28 minutes per night in the matchups against Embiid during the regular season. Amir Johnson, not of any interest. And Ersan Ilyasova is up to 6,600. I think that's probably a little bit too high for Ersan. Yeah, he's been a great producer, but not really at that salary. Two other guys that, of course, we like are Benny Simmons at 10-2 and Jim Johnson. Yes, Jimmy Johnson was on fire game 2. He had 43 points in his 37 minutes at 5,400. I think he's a little bit impacted by the Embiid situation as well, because if Embiid plays more Whiteside minutes, meaning more Olynyk minutes at the 4, and potentially reducing the amount of playing time that Johnson gets. But at 5,400, that is really, really tough to go past, especially with how much they're relying upon him at the moment. At center, Whiteside at 5,500. Well, of course, if Embiid is out, I actually think that becomes a strong option. If Embiid is in, I think that becomes a good option for Whiteside. If Embiid is out, I think that's a little bit tough to use him, just considering how absolutely non-existent he's been. But it's not a horrendous flyer down at 5,500. We know he can easily get you 40, 45, but he has to be engaged, and he's not really engaged in anything at this point, and just looks lost out there at the moment, which of course is not ideal for him and for Miami Heat fans. So yeah, look, not a super interested guy. Bam Adebayo, I don't really think there's much to look at there with him, nor with Rashawn Holmes, who may not even play. If we flip that over to DraftKings, yeah, pretty similar stuff, except the major difference that stands out to me here is Robert Covington's down to 5,600. Now, that is a big departure from the FanDuel pricing, and I'd be very happy with using Covington at that price. That really does scream value, and yeah, he wasn't great in game 2. He still had 25 points, and that's not far off in a game at 5,600, like one of his worst performances. That's value, and I really like that. Same sort of stuff for most other guys. Ersan at 58 gets a little bit more value. I dislike Wade on DraftKings at 54, especially for cash. Whiteside in the same boat. Jim Johnson, Winslow, and Johnson at 57 is in a pretty solid spot there as well. But otherwise, most of the other prices come in fairly similar to how they look over on FanDuel. Let's have a look at the Yahoo side of things. Yeah, that's where we're up to for this game. Justice Winslow coming in at $11 and Olynyk at $19 are fairly strong options. I think you can also consider Amir Johnson at minimum salary, a guy that can give you 20 points. Now, on a Yahoo setting, getting 20 points at $10 is pretty good value, and getting a 2x value there is generally pretty decent. But if Embiid plays, that takes away some of that value. I like Šarić and Redick, and Bellinelli is a much more appealing option over on Yahoo also. Whereas guys like Richardson and Simmons and Whiteside in particular, and even Covington, they're probably priced out of it a little bit too much for me over on Yahoo. Other ways of going about it over there. Let's move on to the next game. We're headed to New Orleans to see the Portland Trailblazers take on the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pelicans, of course, have a 2-game advantage, 2-0 up after beating the Blazers there in Game 1 and Game 2, both in Portland. In that game, it was much of the same from New Orleans. Big minutes for Rondo, Mirotic, Tone Davis, and Drew Holiday, and big production from all of those guys. In fact, all 4 of those guys shot at least 50% from the field, with Anthony Davis, surprisingly, being the lowest, right on 50%. So I think it's hard to rely upon Rondo, Mirotic, and Holiday continually going for 54% plus. So there is a level of regression there. Etuan Moore has also struggled quite a bit. His minutes have been down, but potentially he can get into it, but he's not one of those main 4 players. But very little to look at there, I think, with the Pelicans' rotation or what happened in that game, apart from maybe expecting some sort of level of regression from those 3 guys, Mirotic, Holiday, and Rondo, in terms of their shooting. On the Portland side of things, Mo Harkless was back. He played 27 minutes, which is more than I was expecting, and looked pretty solid. He had one of those games again where he couldn't miss, which has happened just an extraordinary amount of times this year. 11 points on 5 shots in 27 minutes, and you would have to assume, especially with Evan Turner dealing with a toe issue, that Mo moves back into the starting lineup for Game 3 and plays 30-plus minutes. Pat Connaughton got the nod over Shabazz Napier, which was a little bit surprising to me. Let's see if they continue to go that way in this game, while McCollum and Lillard continue to be hounded by the defensive pressure of Rondo and Holiday, and it is limiting what they can do. At some point, they're going to get hot, and at some point, they're going to get their shots off, but it has been a struggle so far, whereas Yusuf Nurkic dealt with a leg issue, but then he was fine to play in the second half and just didn't, and only saw 15 minutes, with Zach Collins getting the most minutes out of their big men between him, Nurkic, and Eddie Davis. Now, both Nurkic and Collins scored in double digits. They were both okay, but I think we're starting to see some writing on the wall that potentially Nurkic's restricted free agency doesn't go that well next year. Could the Blazers be looking to invest in Collins more for the future and make that change maybe a year earlier than what I anticipated? It is going to be interesting to see exactly how they run that for Game 3. I don't think there's really any danger of Nurkic not starting, but Stotts did mention that perhaps a lineup change could come in. I would imagine that's Harkless for Turner, but with the way that Nurkic has been deployed, especially in a matchup where he's got Anthony Davis there, the fact that he's getting so many or so few minutes is a little bit of a concern. For the DFS point of view, the Pelicans are favored by 3 at home. The total is 216. If we look at the point guards, Rondo is up to $7,000, and he's been exceeding that. But we can look at what he did in that last game, and it was great. But he still only had 36 points, which at $7,000 is right on where it needs to be. Now, I'm not saying he's not someone to use. The minutes have been big, but it's not like he absolutely blew out those numbers. And again, I do expect there's going to be some level of shooting regression. Whereas Dame Lillard, he should actually progress to the mean. He's at 9,600. Given how the defense has been going on Lillard, the questionable shot selection and questionable offensive plays that have been going on, it is a little bit tough to go all in on Lillard for cash, though. Other point guards here, Ian Clark, not really much to talk about with him. At shooting guard, CJ McCollum's at 7,200, and while he has struggled, he still exceeded that value in Game 2 with 39 points. I'd be happy going back to the well with him there. Whereas Drew Holiday at 8,400. I know Drew's been playing well, but I think that additional $1,200 there on Drew, plus the potential of his percentage dropping, McCollum's coming up, I'd probably rather take CJ, which is probably not the conventional wisdom at this point, and I love Holiday clearly. I just think that price might price him out of a little bit here on FanDuel. Love Mo Harkless here, small forward, 3,600, had 19 points in Game 1. In his comeback game, exceeded value. Love that. That is a great option to enable you to get some of these high-price guys in. So I think in cash, you almost have to have Mo in there. Got Etuan Moore at 4,500, has really struggled in the first 2 games. It'd only be for tournaments, and even then, I'm not feeling super strong. And then you got Evan Turner, Solomon Hill, and Darius Miller. Turner at 4,000, even though we can shit on Turner as much as we do, and rightfully so, because he's been bad for many, many times. But at $4,000, there is something there for him. But given the toe injury, I think it's a fade. At power forward, we've got a couple of good options here. Al-Farouq Aminu, the Chief.
Sometimes maybe good, sometimes maybe shit.
He was pretty good in game 2. He dropped 33 FanDuel points, and at $5,500, that's fine, but there's no way that you can rely upon him on a daily basis or a nightly basis. So I think he's a strong tournament guy. Well, Davis comes in at 12-7. Now, Tone Davis only had 46 points in game 2. We know how good he is. I just think that's too high to rely upon him in cash, especially trying to find other blokes to fit around him. It's fine for a tournament, but I don't like it for cash. Whereas Nick Mirotic is in a similar spot at $8,000. It's just too high to rely upon for cash. Again, fine for a tournament. He is dealing with an ankle problem, but not looking at him super hard for cash stuff. Then you got Eddie Davis at 3,600, which I'm not sure there's enough upside there unless for some reason they decide to start Davis. For the centres, Zach Collins' minimum salary, absolutely worth taking a tournament flyer on, whereas Nurkic at 7,500 is just way too high. Nothing to do with that in cash at all. Has been clearly bothered and limited in the first 2 games, and he can always go off. We've seen him do that many times. But will he go off? That's the question, and it's something where I look at it and go, yeah, I don't think spending that money on him is probably going to be the best way around it. On DraftKings, similar sort of stuff, except we've got guys like Mirotic coming in $1,000 cheaper, which I think does make him strong at $7,000. Tone Davis at 10.9 is clearly in play for all formats. Yeah, McCullum is strong. Rondo at 7.4 is good. Lillard at 8.9 is in a pretty good spot as well. Yeah, still not as keen on Drew here. Nurkic at 62, still probably a little bit high with how they've been using him also, but all in all pretty similar. Whereas Mo Harkless isn't as attractive on DraftKings as he is on FanDuel. He's at 4,200, which feels almost about right, but I don't hate using that there clearly, but it's not the dog's balls type of play that it is on FanDuel. On Yahoo, Mo comes in strongly, $11, like that there. Rondo, Mirotic, Lillard, they are all pretty strong cash plays, whereas guys like Aminu and even Etuan Moore are more of your tournament looks. McCullum at $30 is probably pushing a bit high, whereas Tone Davis at 58 is borderline to me. No problem using him. Back at home, it's fine, but I think there's some other high-price guys that I would rather, as opposed to Davis on Yahoo, but it's far from a wrong play to consider him in your lineups on Yahoo. Let's move it on to the last game of the night. It's the Golden State Warriors and the San Antonio Spurs. Yeah, terribly sad news out today with Greg Popovich's wife passing away. I had no idea that she was sick, but apparently she'd been sick for quite a while. So I think there's a significant chance that Pop doesn't coach this game 3. Obviously, our condolences, or my condolences, go out to Greg and the rest of his family. Really, massive fan of Popovich. Seems just like a real ripper of a bloke from everything that you hear about him and the way that he acts. So obviously, it's sad news to hear his wife passing away today. The Warriors-Spurs game 2. The Spurs were obviously more competitive in Game 2, but still ended up losing by 15. It's going to be a real struggle for them. They made a change to their starting lineup. Rudy Gay replaced Kyle Anderson and played 37 minutes. We've been talking about Anderson's minutes trending downwards, and they did, and they clearly trended right down to only 10 minutes here. So Gay, I would imagine, continues starting. They also played very few minutes of Tone Parker and DeJounte Murray. Parker only 6 minutes, DeJounte only 13 minutes, meaning that as their 2 primary point guards, they didn't see the court for over half the game. We saw a lot of Pat Mills, Manu Ginobili handling the ball. We even got 3 minutes out of Derek White and Bryn Forbes doing some work there. So some real interesting lineup decisions that Popovich made, making Murray obviously not a real reliable guy for us here, as his minutes continue to be limited and more push towards a Pat Mills type of a player, and Pau Gasol continues to be limited in this matchup, which is far from a surprise. For the Warriors, Quinn Cook off the bench again, only 18 minutes. It appears that those huge minutes he was playing in the regular season are done, while Iguodala was really, really awesome as the starting point guard. Great from Durant, great from Clay, and JaVale McGee was really solid. But he did suffer a quad contusion, and he could miss Game 3. If he is out, I imagine they start Zaza Pachulia and play him in a similar role, but JaVale was actually putting up DFS quality lines. Draymond struggled quite a bit with his shot. The other numbers were still okay, but yeah, he did struggle there. But otherwise, everything else fairly similar. Jordan Bell, Damian Jones out of the rotation, apart from a minute at the end, with Kevon Looney getting those 21 backup minutes along with David West. So that isn't something I guess we do have to pay attention to. That the way they're running those rotations. Let's have a look at how it all looks for Game 3 now. The Warriors are favoured by 3.5, and the total is 206 points. As I said, McGee is listed as questionable. David West hurt his ankle in Game 2, but he is fine. He's not listed on the injury report at all. Of course, Steph and Pat McCaw are both out, and Kawhi, of course, he is out as well. At point guard, Millsy's at 4,800. He's probably the only Spurs point guard you would consider, but at that price, it's not a cash lock. There is still some tournament upside. He had a nice 26 points in Game 2, but struggled a bit in Game 1. Quinny Cook, Sean Livingston, Tone Parker, DeJounte Murray. In general, get your point guards from a different matchup, not this one. At shooting guard, Dan Green is at 4,000. He just is getting absolutely nothing going whatsoever. So if you're going to use Danny Green, I feel like it has to be in tournaments. And that's the risk with using, say, a big $12,700 on Anthony Davis, is you might be forced to put guys like Dan Green into your cash lineup, and he comes out there and shits out 11 points and really gives you nothing. So that's the risk with those high price options in the small slate contests. I love Clay at 6,500. I think that's a real strong, solid cash type of option at shooting guard. Manu at 45 is more of an upside guy, but I'm just not sure the minutes upside is there for him. While Brynny Forbes at minimum salary, I just really don't think there's much to see with Forbesy. Love Rudy Gay at 5,900. Really strong on that. I think the minutes are going to be big. I think he exceeds that. Now, I like him more on some other sites, but I do like him here. And Durant at $11,000. That's the big name guy that I want on FanDuel, as opposed to the 12-7 from Durant. It's a big difference to get a guy like that there. Iguodala at 4,600. Really hard to go past him as well as the starting point guard. Really like that spot. Kyle Anderson's tough to go for. At power forward, Draymond's at 7,300. Has been disappointing in the first two games from a DFS point of view, but I think using him in a tournament is worth looking at, but nothing more. David West, not really. Well, LaMarcus at 10,000. Bounced back with 51 in Game 2. And prior to Game 1, he'd been putting up some good numbers against the Warriors, and another 50 from him at home in Game 3 is a huge possibility. So I'm okay with using LaMarcus here. Kevon Looney's at 3,700. With the uncertainty behind JaVale McGee's status, I think that Looney, with his steals and blocks upside, is definitely a tournament guy. He can very easily have 26, 27 points, and that makes him a really good value play at that sort of cheap of a price. Davis Bertans is getting some interesting minutes. He's at minimum salary, but he's just a flyer type guy and not one I'm really all that interested in. JaVale at 3,600. I would have been all in on JaVale as a cash game center. He had 28 in Game 2. He's averaging 24 over his last 3. At 3,600, given the way the matchups are going, I would have been happy locking him in. But unfortunately, we're just not at that spot because we don't know what his injury is like, and that makes it a tougher one. Would I use Zaza? Potentially, but don't feel as good about Pachulia as I do about McGee. As for Pau Gasol at 4,700, just not getting the playing time and the production's not there. It's a really bad matchup for Pau. On DraftKings, Gay at 5,100 really screams. So look, you look at FanDuel and you go, I love Mo Harkless. On DraftKings, I love Rudy Gay at 5,100. They're the two real standouts. Durant at 10.3 is a sensational price as well, I believe, on DraftKings. Clay and LaMarcus also really strong, while Mills and Looney, as with FanDuel, they do have some tournament upside. Hard to go with any of those other guys that we talked about, DeJounte or Dan Green or any of those guys. Iguodala at 4,800. It's not quite as appealing as what it is on FanDuel. There is still something that's interesting there, but it's definitely not the best option, in my opinion. Let's go across to, where are we going to now? To Yahoo to have a look at some value there. Gay and Mills. Mills is minimum salary on Yahoo, so I think that's very strong. Gay at $13 is also good. I like Iguodala, Ginobili, Thompson, and Durant. I think they all have some value there. Looney, again, a minimum salary tournament upside play, especially if JaVale is out, that would really work in his favour, while Draymond has come down to $30. And I think $30 for Draymond Green makes him a tournament sort of guy, but definitely not someone, even on Yahoo, that I'd be looking at as some sort of cash anchor. Let's look now at the Moneyball stuff for the Aussies. And also, I meant to mention this yesterday. News for Australian DFS players is DraftKings is going to be opening up here in Australia. Let's see how it goes. Hopefully it means bigger contests, more double ups and more 50-50 type contests, which for some reason Draft Stars and Moneyball refuse to do. And hopefully they don't buy into this bullshit target system that Moneyball and Draft Stars use, which literally are a way to steal your money. They are horrible tournaments, and hopefully DraftKings doesn't do it. People still play them, and do not play any of the target contests in the playoffs. They are too highly priced. There is no way that you are going to get them. You are literally donating money to those guys. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens when DraftKings starts out here. For cash games on Moneyball, love Rondo, Harkless, Šarić, Gay, and even Aminu at 5,000. I think that's a pretty strong option. Jim Johnson, Klay Thompson, Iguodala, Aldridge, and Benny Simmons. They all have pretty strong cash value. In tournaments, you got Zachy Collins. My voice is going. Pat Mills, Olynyk, Joshie Richardson, Lillard, Durant, Mirotic, Tone Davis, and Dwyane Wade. If you do enjoy this podcast, make sure you have given it a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. If you have already, go grab your partner, your mum, your dad, your brother. Go grab their phone and sign in and leave a review as well. You can also find this podcast on Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube, where you can go leave a thumbs up, give it a subscribe, and leave a comment down below the video. That would be awesome. Check out the rest of the Locked On Podcast Network covering the National Football League, the National Basketball Association, and now Major League Baseball. You can follow all of our written articles and podcasts at lockedonsports.com, so check that out. And on Twitter at LockedOnNBANet. We are done here, guys. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Stephen Adams.